Welcome to Soul Soldier Speaks, where we honor the warrior within each of us on life's battlefield. I'm your host, Lindsay Taylor. Here we stand with those on the front lines of their own lives, those battling suicidal thoughts, addiction, grief, and life's hardest challenges. We honor the loved ones standing beside those struggling and remember those we've lost. Each episode, we delve into raw, unfiltered conversations and stories of people who faced the darkest of nights and emerged with healing, transformation, and hope. Together, we will navigate the battlefield, focusing on the battles that save and restore. This podcast is more than stories. It's a rallying cry, an army of soul soldiers reclaiming the light one story at a time. Together, we rise. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Soul Soldier Speaks podcast. I'm super honored today to be sitting with Caden Rachwal. I said your last name wrong last time when I was speaking to your mom, but I got it right?
Yep.
Yes. Caden, welcome to the Soul Soldier Speaks podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's such an honor to have you here. We have some really important stuff to talk about today. Speaking of soul soldiers, I love that I get to sit across every week from people like yourself, soldiers who have endured a battle, right? Everyone I speak to on this podcast has been through a deep battle. You bear wounds that may not bleed, but it cuts just as deep. Caden lost his brother, Logan, to a fentanyl overdose 4 years ago when you had just turned 18. Sibling grief is something that I think is often overshadowed. And when I sat down with your mom, Erin, the episode just released last week, when I sat down with Erin, that was actually something that she really wanted to bring to light was sibling grief. And I thought that was really, really cool. She said some things that I had never even considered, and I have kids. As you know, I think you know, I lost my son to a fentanyl poisoning as well. And yeah, the siblings, they suffer too in different ways, right? So that really hit me. And so your mom has it made it part of her mission, right, to recognize sibling grief. And so the Love Logan Foundation, have you been a part of that and bringing that forward? That's what I read.
Yes, I have.
Okay, so what part do you have in that? I just want to hear that for a moment.
In the past, I've been helping them with the annual golf outing, and I also help them. They ask me questions about it, like billboard designs, what I think. So I'm not, with being across the country, I'm not playing the biggest role in it, but I am still somewhat involved. Something that I think is really important. It's taken me a while to come around to it because it wasn't always my favorite thing right away. With feeling like Logan, was taking up a lot of time, even after he'd been gone.
Yes.
But I think now I've come around to it, and I think it's great, especially even the billboards they got up here in Arizona yesterday for the National Bereaved Siblings Day.
Saw that.
I think that was awesome. And so there's a lot of things that I am slowly starting to get more involved in. Okay. I think it's a little maturity that's playing a factor in that.
For sure. So speaking of it's called National Fentanyl Bereaved Siblings Day, right?
Yes.
Did the Love Logan Foundation, are you guys the one that advocated to start that?
Yes.
Okay.
My parents, when they visited Washington, D.C., they have some DEA contacts, and they got that started with a DEA sponsoring that. So yesterday was the first annual day. So
the first annual day. So April 3rd is now officially National Fentanyl Bereaved Siblings Day. Yes. So that is why we have Caden here, is to talk about sibling grief and honestly just to honor siblings and the silent soldiers of this epidemic. I think you guys are really the silent soldiers that go sometimes overshadowed by parent grief. And you guys carry this missing piece in your heart every day. And also, like you said, sometimes the attention can be so drawn to the person that we lost that sometimes siblings, I think, can get lost in the shuffle of that. So I definitely want to talk more about that. So actually, how I wanted to start this off was not asking about your brother. I wanted to ask about you. So can you tell our listeners just a little bit about you?
My name's Caden. I'm graduating college at Grand Canyon University in a few weeks. Grew up in Wisconsin. I enjoy sports, and there's not much to me, really.
Isn't that funny when people ask, like, who are you? And you're like, I don't know. Do I say what I do? What would you say is like some qualities that you have that make you unique and make you you?
very driven, I should say. A lot of, what's affected me in the, that with losing a sibling has made me quite different than a lot of other people my age. So that's one of the biggest qualities about me is that I feel like I may have a certain depth that, you don't see too often. Not to like toot my own horn. But, but that's something that, other siblings could definitely relate to.
Sure.
They've gone through something similar. But yeah, those are a couple of things.
Yeah, there's a level of growing up and maturing that you have to do, I think, for sure. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about your brother beyond his struggles? Who was he? What was your relationship like? And what did you love most about your brother?
Growing up, he was my best friend. We were 14 months apart, so that's very close. And I'd like to say when we were younger, we didn't have a ton of friends. Logan at, the first school we went to, he got bullied more than I did. So, we kind of stuck together because we had a bully on our block that he wasn't the nicest person. But it helped my relationship with Logan a lot because we got very close from that. He was my best friend, hands down. It was great to have someone that, we had joint pool parties with both of our friends. He's a great kid. Obviously, there's, siblings, we have our issues for sure.
100%. It wasn't perfect? You're saying the relationship wasn't perfect?
No. But, looking back, there's not anything I would change. We did grow apart for a few months when he moved off to college. I was very angry with him when he moved out. And I slowly was able to let that go. And we kind of got back to a good relationship, which, to this day, I'm so happy that I let go of that anger. He was outgoing. He was happy. He had his struggles like everyone does, but he was a good person. Obviously, there's other aspects that can start taking over when there's substances involved. But he's a great person. He had a great heart. He had the biggest heart out of, to this day, anyone I've ever met. And he always thought he loved animals too. That's something that, if you asked my parents or anyone that was close to him, how big of a heart he had, he cared about animals to the point, we were at Disneyland and he was worried about the geese when the fireworks were going off. So I'd say that's his biggest qualities. He was very caring, loved our cats. There's a lot more depth to him than maybe the outside people see just because they see him for, the fentanyl poisoning, they see the billboards and they see the Love Logan Foundation, but they don't see who he was as a person.
100%. And I love that you point that out because that is exactly why I said, who was he beyond his struggles? Because I never want somebody to be defined by that because there's so much more than that, right? Their struggles we all have struggles, right? And that doesn't define us. And so I'm very big on that. So I love that you point that out. Yeah. Wow. He truly sounds like an amazing soul with a beautiful heart. Yeah. Do you have a favorite memory with him that pops out in your mind that stands out?
I'd have to go with, it's not a specific time, but we'd always go on camping trips with my parents. And I love the outdoors. Like I love fishing. Logan wasn't as outdoorsy as me, I'd like to say at least, but we'd go camping every year up to Minocqua, Wisconsin. And those were my favorite trips as a family. But honestly, other than that, I'd say that my favorite memories were when he went to UW Milwaukee. He didn't have a car. He never got his license, which I'm so grateful for because it allowed me to go and, he'd want a Monster Energy drink and I'd go drop that off and then we get to talk and I'd get to check in on him. So I'd honestly say maybe that's my favorite memory just because it allowed us to get close again, which I'm forever grateful for.
Yeah.
So if I had to choose, I'd probably actually say that.
Oh, I love that. Something that seems more simple, but like looking back, you're like, wow, that was a really great thing to have right before he passed. Wow. That's incredible. You know, grief sometimes begins before we lose the person, especially in situations like this, where maybe they started to go down a path with substances, right? I know that was true in our situation, that about a year before Alex passed, he really changed, and we didn't even recognize him. So for you, do you feel that to be true? That were you grieving at all, maybe who your brother used to be, or was there any sort of grief before he actually passed away? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. It's something that, we'd think about, and by we, I mean, my parents and I, we'd talk about it when he moved out. We talk about it a lot, actually, that, we don't want him to end up dead or, in jail or something like that. And it's always was in the back of, our minds, that we were worried, and for me, I think the grieving started when, we had a conversation when I was dropping him back off at his dorm room. His girlfriend he was supposed to go on a train trip to see his girlfriend in Illinois. And I never really knew how bad things were getting with him until that day when I dropped him off after his girlfriend canceled, and he was a complete mess, and I felt terrible. It's obviously no one wants to be in that position, but he said he was going to, go start drinking, and he joked about taking pills. And I was like, that's not funny. We started talking about that. And obviously as a younger brother, that doesn't put me in the best position
right.
of, do I talk to my parents or do I talk to him specifically? We were both adults, so it put me in a rough position. But after that day, I started really noticing how bad things were. And I think that's a point where I started realizing that, he may not be around as long as I'd like him to be.
Wow. Did you ever share that with your parents, or is that something you carried on your own?
I honestly don't know if I told my parents or not. I tried to be really careful just because Logan and I were finally getting back to a good place together. I was always in a rough position of, do I tell them? Do I not?
Yeah.
I'm worried about him. What do I do? But I also, I didn't want to be a tattletale either. So there's certain things I told them, certain things that I thought was best to handle on my own. And I don't know, that whole, span of 8 months or so it's still all a blur.
Yeah.
So I couldn't tell you if I told them or not.
I asked that because that's a lot to carry, right?
Yeah.
I can only imagine how you were feeling at that time. And I don't think there's even a right or wrong answer to that, right? I think that, first of all, even if you would have told your parents, what would they have been able to do, right? I always say at the end of the day, if somebody's struggling with addiction or substance use, they have to be the ones to want the help, right? And it sounds like your parents did so much throughout the years to try and help him, right? So maybe you just being a supportive presence, and that was the best that you could do, and that was what he needed, right? So I asked that because that had to be hard for you to be in that position.
Totally, yeah.
Can you walk us through that day of losing him and finding out how you found out he passed and how that changed your world?
Yeah. So obviously it was Valentine's Day, 2021. I'll obviously never forget that. I had to work the whole day. So Valentine's Day was always the busiest day of the year for us. So I was at work the whole day. I had a kind of girlfriend at the time, and we were just hanging out after work. I hadn't heard from Logan all day, which was odd because we had been texting the day before about he wanted to go to the bank to deposit some money. And typically, since he didn't have a car, I would take him. I told him, hey, I'm sorry, I'm working, so I'm super busy. And I worked until the evening, at least it was dark out. And then I went after work to get some food, and I got a call from my mom. I think I got a text first, actually. And my first thought was something had happened to my dad. I know that, I don't know, obviously I couldn't think of anything else. It would be my mom was the one letting me know. I was okay. Logan, I didn't even think, that getting home would be about him because he was at UWM. So I raced home, and my parents were worried. I could tell something was really wrong when I got home. They had the van running already, and they were already in it, and they're like, we need to go now. And we started driving to UWM. I got a text from one of his friends, and he had mentioned, hey, have you heard from Logan today? And I was obviously, my mind was, thinking the worst. I kind of had just this feeling, and I know my parents both did too. We've talked about that. You just have a gut feeling of, what was going on. And we got there and we saw a fire truck, and in my head, I'm thinking like, this isn't good. It's definitely not good. We had cameras too at our house, and we had seen the police had gone to our house, and I know, I wanted to be a police officer for so long, and I obviously know why they would be, showing up at your house. But we walked into the UWM police station, which happened to be in his dorm building, which is strange. And they walked us into a room, and the detective had told us that someone reported not hearing from him, that they found him in his dorm room unresponsive, and he was dead. And I changed my life. To this day, I don't have any words for. It's just hard. It's not a position I ever thought I would be in. I knew things weren't great, but I never thought I'd be there at that moment. And of course, then we had to go up and see him. And that was, I'm thankful that he wasn't in our house, but that's an image that, even to this day, that when I go to sleep at night, I can still see him in his, dorm bed, lifeless. And that's something I don't know if they'll ever go away, but it's a image that is burned in my brain probably forever. So it's, I don't know. No.
I feel the weight of that. I feel the weight of that so deeply. And this is obviously so personal for me too. And so I just, as you're talking us through like your day, like the worst day of your life, probably this far. Right. And I think about our worst day. Right. And then I think about, as you're talking, I'm thinking about my kids and that experience from the parent perspective of having to tell them. And in our situation, Alex had been brought to the hospital, and so he was on a ventilator. And we ended up just having my sister bring the kids to the hospital, and just like walking through like how we were going to talk to him about it. And he had a brother who was 14, and then his sister was 7. So she was pretty little. So we had littler kids too, to try and make sense of this. Right. And just having to break the news to them was probably the second hardest thing next to losing Alex, right? Was telling them and then watching them. We gave them the decision if they wanted to go in and say goodbye to him or not. And they both chose to. However, my 7-year-old, I don't think she quite understood what she was going to be walking into. We tried to paint the picture. We tried to explain, like, he's on tubes. We tried to like explain it to her, but she's 7, she can only understand so much. And then watching her walk into that room, it's something that'll be etched in their brains too for the rest of their life. Right. And so they weren't there when he passed. They didn't see that, but right before. So man, I just feel the weight of that. There is no words.
Yeah.
There's really not. Right. What has been the hardest part of losing your only sibling?
Sorry. For me, the hardest part is it's kind of a 2-part thing. Or I should say a 3-part thing. People don't understand. No one understands what it's, not no one, but most people don't understand what it's like to live your whole childhood from the time you can remember to you're an adult. And then all of a sudden in one day it's taken away from you. Everything you've known, it's gone. The whole future that, you wanted, gone. You lose your past, your present, and your future. That's something I've talked with my parents about, because obviously there's definitely similarities between, from my understanding, because I obviously haven't been through the same thing, but from my understanding, there's similarities between, with people who lose a child and someone that loses a siblings, but there's a lot of differences that, aren't talked about. And I mean, just as it is for, a parent losing a child, it's an out of order death, and you have all these expectations of, it's as simple as him coming to my high school graduation or being my best man at my wedding and things like that you'll never get. That's one of the hardest. The other thing that's very hard is, a family vacation will never be the same. I used to have my best friend on our vacations. I used to have my best friend to hang out with. Now it's very different, and it's not my parents' fault. It's no one's fault, but it's a hard adjustment that maybe my parents don't understand, that a lot of, people just don't get it. And I'd say the third part that's the hardest is people, not only do they forget, but it goes away for them. If you're, as I'm sure maybe you've noticed, that they'll check in on you, the few days after, a few weeks, few months, but 4 years down the line, it's still there for you, but people don't realize that it's something that you think about every day. At least I'd say I think about Logan every day. I text him still. It's something that, it'll be the next, how many ever years I'm left here on earth, I'm going to think about him. But people don't get how, maybe it's been 4 years, and people will say the most insensitive things of, it's been 4 years, you should get over it. But it's not how it works. And that's one of the hardest things, is people thinking that, it's your time to get over it. But it's just not, that's not the way that this works. As a sibling, a parent, anyone, that loses someone so close to them, it's not something that you can just put away and not think about.
No, I always say, I think grief is a lifelong journey, right? And especially like what you're talking about, there's different types of grief, right? But when it's something so close to you like that, like I do think sibling grief and parent-child loss mirror each other very closely, but there's some unique challenges that siblings have that parents don't have. But that loss is so significant that, it's a lifelong journey. And just like what you said, I mean, there's not a day that goes by multiple times a day. It's not even just once a day, right? That like, Alex isn't on my mind. He's on my mind, I mean, so much. Almost sometimes it's in a weird way. I don't know. I think your kids are always on your mind, but like when that missing piece is there, it's on your mind in a different way than like my other kids, right? And but I think it's just that closeness, it will always be there because you feel that closeness with your sibling, with your child, right? Going back to what you said about family vacations, I never thought about that. Like, I wonder if my kids feel that difference. Like, it'll never be the same to be on a family vacation. So is it hard for you to go on family vacations now?
Yeah. Just because I have so many memories. I mean, we did vacations, we went, one of the ones I remember the most is we went to Cancun, and Logan and I, we hung out the whole time. We played ping pong and all that stuff, cliff jumping, everything. And if I ever was to go back with my parents, the first thing I'm going to think about is who's not there. And a lot of times that can come out, I can get very bitter and angry about it, especially towards my parents, just because it's something that they might not think about because, it's not, it's not a normal circumstance. So they don't necessarily think about it, but it makes it very hard for me. And that has nothing to do with, my parents or not wanting to go or anything like that.
Sure.
It's just very different than how it's the normal of it. So
yeah, so I'm a twin, and I feel like with you and Logan, with the ages that you guys were so close, it's almost like having a twin. And I can only imagine, like, as we're talking, I think that would probably be the second biggest loss I could ever face besides losing a child would be my twin. Right. So I'm just trying to relate, and I could feel how much that would deeply impact me as well. And then I obviously, from the parent perspective, watching my kids, which your mom has noticed, right? Like how much siblings need to be honored in this. I mean, I have watched my kids grieve deeply over this, especially his 7-year-old sister. For whatever reason, that age gap, the 10 years, they were very close. It was almost like he was like a, protective older brother, and they just had this very unique bond. So it's heavy, it's hard, and it needs to be acknowledged. And I hope people listening that have a sibling that they've lost to this can at least feel seen through this and heard. Do you feel your role in your family has changed since your brother passed away? Like, has that, okay. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that. So.
Well, I'm sorry, Mom and Dad, if you guys are going to get upset with me, but in a lot of ways, I don't feel like I don't feel as much like their kid anymore. I feel like, and it's totally like, I don't, hold resentment for it. But I feel more as a equal to them in a way of where it's my job as well to make sure that I take care of them now. There was a lot of pressure that's been dumped on me, through this, not even, without them even knowing. It's not pressure they've put on me, but it's pressure that happens naturally now with, originally having me and Logan, and overnight switching to suddenly being an only child. There's all of those eyes that may have been like on Logan and me, all the focus shifted right to me in some ways, and in other ways I've still felt like I'm not seen. And I got very used to being the child that can just take care of himself and go to work, go to school, kind of not necessarily raise myself, but I was very responsible and didn't have, I could kind of come and go when I wanted to. And that all changed real fast. And even to this day, there's some things that I feel like sometimes I'm almost the parent with, making sure that my parents are going to be okay. Just because, I don't know, that's just how I am is I'm very, very, very good in a way at masking my emotions and taking my time to, okay, I gotta push through today and I can deal with this later, when I'm home by myself alone. And obviously, I'll never understand what it's like to be my mom. And I know that there's some times that I need to be the one to take care of her. So it's definitely, switched the family dynamic. A lot of times I feel, I hate seeing my parents cry. That's something I'd seen before, but very different than now. And so there's always this extra pressure to be perfect, which is, it's never going to happen. Right. But
you're human.
But there's it's a lot of internal things that have switched that maybe other people don't notice. Maybe my parents might not even notice either. So.
Wow. Gosh. This is like so eye-opening. I never thought about it quite from that perspective either. And like, as you're talking, buddy, if you're listening, we have his brother just turned 18. Alex's brother just turned 18. So like I said, he was 14 at the time, but he, first of all, I always say grief is like a thumbprint. It's unique to every individual. And so nobody grieves the exact same way. And I think that's okay. That there's no right or wrong way to grieve. There's no one way to grieve. Right. But for, Austin, I've noticed with him, he really more took on a caretaker role in the grief process is what he's shown, at least. Right. And so maybe there's masking happening. And, so anyway, I'm glad you point that out, because I think, and I don't want to put words into his mouth, but I feel like that could be how he is perceiving it too. Like, I now am the man, the oldest brother of the house, if you will. And he has to take on that caretaker protective type role. It's what it's appeared like. And I never thought about it that way until you were just sharing that. Wow. How has your grief evolved over time from like the initial shock to now? And you had pointed out that like people will reach out a lot in the beginning, right? And then 4 years later, it's not much, it's hardly anything. And I always say, I actually think in some ways, the grief has changed, right? There's been different flavors of it, if you will, different variations. But I think sometimes the further out you go, the harder it is, the more lonely it is. And then you're further from those memories, right? Yeah. So for me, that's how it feels. But so how has that changed for you from that initial shock and that initial losing him to now? Yeah,
no, I totally get that because, the farther it gets, the harder it is to remember his voice, right? And I'm sure that kind of goes across the board. That just happens. Mm-hmm. It's harder to, picture them in your head without looking at a picture. Harder to remember every little detail that maybe right away you still remembered. It definitely doesn't get easier. That's one thing that I'd say always bothered me. Even at the funeral, people would say, "Don't worry, it'll get easier." And to this day, I hate that statement because it's so false. It doesn't. If anything, I think it gets harder. It doesn't get easier, and I will stand by that forever. Mm-hmm. It changes, and you may get better at dealing with it because you become stronger. It's something that obviously you're going to be stronger 4 years later than you were the day that it happened. But it definitely gets harder because you have less people that care, less people that, reach out, less people you can talk to. And that's nobody's fault. You never want, as much as I'd love someone, like close to me in my life, maybe one of my friends, to understand, you never want them to understand. You never want them to understand. You hope that they never go through the same thing. And that's the hardest part. It's like, I don't want you guys to understand, but I'd love if you could understand. And I think that's the hardest thing when you keep going. People don't realize, but at the same time, I think it builds great relationships because people that do check in on you and do see how you're doing. I have one friend, my best friend, Jacob, he to this day will still check in on me. And that's how I know that he's a good friend, is he's stuck with me for 4 years. So I think there's definitely some positives, even though it definitely gets harder.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's almost like shifting from that whole verbiage of easier. It's definitely not easier. Like you said, if anything, yeah. I can attest to it's harder. But I think what you had pointed out, that it changes over time. I think that's what people really need to understand when it comes to grief, is it's not necessarily this easier, harder thing. I mean, I will agree it's harder. But it's more so, I think I had somebody tell me once that you learn how to carry that hole in your heart. That's what it is. You just learn how to carry it. Yeah. With time, but it doesn't.
It's the perfect way to put it.
Yeah, yeah. When I had heard that stuck with me from like the very beginning. Have you ever experienced any do you ever experience any signs or feel anything like with your brother? Like feel his presence? Do you have any of that?
Definitely. Hawks are one thing that my parents notice, and I've started to notice it too. I wasn't always noticing them, but more recently for me, it's more of tattoos. I have a lot for Logan. It's my little way of carrying him with me and reminding me and knowing he's always with me. Some days too, and on his birthday, I always go on a hike, go and get to see the mountain and see the sunset. So that's definitely something that, when the sun's setting, I just can feel that. So it's a little different than maybe my parents, their way of, connecting with him still. But I definitely feel his presence and that he's still looking down on me.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. I got my very first tattoo ever, and it's for Alex, and rainbows is our thing. And so I have down my spine, look for the rainbow. Awesome. And he had actually got a tattoo with his very first professional tattoo. He started self-tattooing before he passed away, but he got his very first professional tattoo 2 days before he passed away with my husband. And so I ended up going back to that tattoo artist and had him do this. So I agree that can be really meaningful. How has this experience shaped the way you see life, the way you love, the way you live? How has this experience shaped you today?
It's definitely shaped everything about me. Not to say that I'm not. I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. I used to be a lot more happier. It is, and some of that's a good thing and a bad thing. I'm definitely just completely changed me as a person. I'm obviously still, part of me is bitter and angry about what happened with Logan. It's hard to wrap your head around for sure. But I also look at life a lot differently. It's hurt, but helped my relationship with my parents, because I know that life is short and I can't, even if I'm upset with them, which we obviously have our struggles with everything that's happened. It's just, we have our struggles.
Sure.
But I know that I have to make things right with them. I have to make things right with everybody in my life, before I walk out the door, because if I don't, you never know if you're going to see them again. It's changed my outlook on everything. I have Narcan in my house. I talk to my friends. I probably sound like like a mom sometimes when I'm like, please be careful, guys. Like I never want you guys, something to happen like that to you guys. And then the other thing is, I think it's given me a type of strength that I've needed. I've had a lot of other things that happen, like my grandpa Jack passing away. I like to call him my grandpa. He passed away shortly after, 2 years after Logan. And that was when I was actually with him when he had a heart attack. And it's definitely, if I wouldn't have, this is going to sound bad, but if I wouldn't have lost Logan first, I don't know how I would have gotten through those two. My grandpa Jack, part of the reason I came to Arizona was because he lived out here half the year. So it's in a way, I'm thankful that I dealt with something much worse first to go through those next few losses, because they didn't, and not to sound that, they didn't faze me, but in a sense, they didn't faze me as much as maybe they would have, which I'm grateful for, because, I've been able to keep pushing through, and I even lived in my grandpa's condo at the time. I don't know how I would have gotten through that if I hadn't already had some, gotten a little bit stronger. And that's one thing that I've really changed in is loss around me. It doesn't necessarily affect me as much, which is a good thing, and I think it might be a bad thing too. So
I think it is what it is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like man, so much of what you're saying, I'm just like, yes, yes, yes. Like, I think when you face that ultimate loss, if you will, right? Like maybe some of the deepest loss you can face, it totally changes you, first of all. Like it changed, my entire outlook on everything. But yeah, it can, not everybody, but it can force you to grow and expand in ways that maybe you wouldn't have grown and expanded if you hadn't been through that kind of loss. And so I think that that's very true. Yeah. Is there a mission or a message now that you carry in your brother's honor?
If I had to pick one, it's obviously that fentanyl is dangerous. It's not something to mess with. And the biggest thing that my parents are working on this too, but the biggest thing I'd like for people to know is there's a difference between a normal college life and getting into pills and a lot of things. And my parents might have a different outlook, but I understand that people my age, my friends, they're going to do what they want to do no matter what. I think the most important thing is they need to know the risk. Is that really worth it? A big thing that I've been, like, I obviously haven't ever done it, but I've been around is cocaine. So many people in Arizona, for some reason, just coke is huge. And consistently, time after time, if I know someone that's doing it, I let them know, hey, I can't change your mind, but at least look up what the rate of laced cocaine is. At least go get fentanyl test strips. Stop, obviously. I'm not your parent, but this isn't safe. You're gonna kill yourself and you won't even know it. So and it's the hardest thing is I try to be reasonable with the fact that I can't control what someone else is going to do. At the end of the day, everyone has their own free will. At the end of the day, Logan had his own free will. But maybe if he would have known, if he would have had Narcan there, if he would have had a fentanyl test strip, it could have been different. And that might be something that my parents disagree with the way I look at it. But it's also, I'm a little bit younger, and I know that, I could tell my roommates don't get into that, but let's say that my best friend was doing it. I'd hope he'd listen to me, but chances are he's going to do what he wants to do anyways. And I think that the age difference between, my parents and I, we have different outlooks on it, because I'd love everyone to just say no. That'd be great, but that's not real life.
Right.
It's not realistic. I'd love, I tell people, bring Narcan to the bar. I do it. It's something that I think is important. And my message, in my opinion, is, first off, don't do it. Please don't do it. It's not worth it at all, because you're flipping a coin if you're going to live or die. That's what I like to tell my friends. That I let them know, hey, if you're going to do that, it's a coin flip. If it hits tails, you're dead. And it sounds maybe morbid when I tell them, but it's true. But I also then, if that's what their choice is, I want them to at least know that, A, there's someone that cares about them. Make sure they know where the nearest Narcan is if they're around that stuff. Because in college, it's so hard to escape, that lifestyle. Everybody knows somebody that does some type of drug. It's just the way it is. So I like to be realistic and make sure that everyone knows that you're stupid. If you're going to choose that, you're really dumb. But at least know where your nearest Narcan is. Know where you can get, test strips. A lot of dorms have Narcan now, which is great. They don't have enough of it, but at least they have it. And I think that's my long-winded answer of why, what I think is important for people to understand.
My gosh. There's so much you said that I love. And I think it's important that we talk about this, because I actually did fentanyl testimony in Colorado. From Colorado, and we got involved with a bill out there. And actually, so I used to, prior to what I do now, I worked with teens in a high school. So I was around, and I had teens telling me all the time, come in my office, you have no idea, the bathrooms are flooded with people doing drugs. So it's everywhere, even in the high school days, right? So yes, college for sure. And I think even in high school, teenage experimentation with drugs and alcohol is very common. I always say, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's good. So exactly what you're saying. I'm not advocating for it. I'm saying don't do it, right? And also, we have to be really, really realistic to the fact that is a part of growing up. That is a part of being a teenager, being a college student, being a young person. It's just, that is a thing, is experimentation with drugs and alcohol. And so it's really important that I think we share all of this so that people don't feel shame either. Whoever's listening, if that's you, there's not shame in that. It's just hear what we're saying, that A, don't do it because you are flipping a coin, right? Life or death. But B, if you are going to do it, there's safer ways to at least help your odds be better. To land on the life side, right? To keep living. And I think what you're talking about with that is the fentanyl test strips. I think most people know at this point that that's a thing, but that's huge, right? So yeah, if you're going to do that, test your drugs first. And then I think the other piece of that, of course, is the Narcan, because it's a life-saving drug. And I think, that's where me and your mom talked a lot about that, where a big issue comes in too, is I think a lot of people are afraid to call the cops or afraid to do things because they're worried they're going to get in trouble, or to get help, I should say, because they're worried they're going to get in trouble. But there's a Good Samaritan law, right? There's things like, so I think we need to educate college students and high school students on those things too. I think sometimes those things just aren't super known. They're just worried they're going to get in trouble, right? That was the case in our situation. So yeah, I'm glad to hear that like more college campuses have access to Narcan. I think it's huge. And so, yeah, I think we have to be realistic, right? Like, yes, I think at the end of the day, don't do it. But if you're going to, we have to be realistic. It's very common out there. Yeah. And so I feel you completely. I hear that. And I'm so glad you're bringing this up, because I think this is what's going to save lives. We can't necessarily stop people, but we can have people maybe be a little bit smarter about what they're doing and how they're going about it. Yeah. I say that fentanyl has changed the game. In the testimony, I said that it's robbed teenagers and young people of that typical experimentation phase. And that's truly sad. My husband always says, he's like, I don't think I would be alive if I was a teenager in today's world, because he did all that stuff too. Yeah. So it's a sad reality for sure. What would you say to another sibling listening right now, who's walking the same kind of grief that you are? What would you say to them?
I don't always have the best advice, but I want to let them know that, you're not alone. That's something that I've really realized throughout, the last 4 years is I've at times felt very alone, but I've realized that there are so many, as the opioid epidemic's getting worse, I've realized that I'm definitely not alone. There are tons and tons of people in a very, maybe not the same situation, but similar. I think it's important to remember that your story's not wasted. There's a lot of good that can come out of this, and as maybe wrong as that is for, some people might think that's wrong, but there is so much good that can come out of such a crappy situation. For example, this podcast. I'm sure it wouldn't have come, wouldn't have happened without the situation that you are in now. My parents, they wouldn't have Love Logan Foundation without what happened to Logan. I used to be terrified of public speaking. I hated being on camera. I hated talking about this, but I'm here today. I've talked on CNN with my parents. I've talked on local news, and I would have never done that if this hadn't happened. You can use your pain for good. Every single person that, if you're talking to a friend, if a sibling's out there listening and they have a friend that's struggling, they can talk to them and change their life. And, that's one life you're already saving. And imagine if they go and tell someone, hey, one of my close friends had their sibling passed away. You need to be careful, and you can save so many lives without even realizing it, just by having a simple conversation because you've been through it. And I think that, I'd like to say that I've thankfully never had to use my Narcan in my house, or that I've ever brought with me places, or that's in my backpack. But think of the good that could come out of just having it. Think of the good that with the knowledge I have today, I could save someone's life. And that's, it's as simple as that. And I think it's important for siblings and parents, everybody that has been affected by, fentanyl and the growing problem. I think it's important to remember you can use the situation that you're in to grow from it, help others. And you could save so many lives without even realizing it.
Yeah. The purpose to pain there is. Yeah. By the way, you're like, I don't have the best advice. Everything you're saying is amazing. Like, you are meant for this. You have a voice, and it's very powerful. And what you're saying is huge. And I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people. And so give yourself more credit. Like, this is incredible, like, truly. And just speaking from the heart, right? Like, not holding back, not worrying about what mom and dad are going to think or what other people, right? Like, that's what needs to be spoken, is the truth, honestly. right? Like the real and raw, honest, and this is your truth, right? Everybody has their own truths, right? But I'm glad you're speaking your truth. That's huge. Keep doing that. That's amazing. Is there a song or a quote or a scripture that's carried you through this loss?
Well, scripture for sure. Of course, now like Isaiah 43:1. My mom and I both have part of the verse tattooed on me, the first half, and then my mom has the second half.
That's cool.
I hope I didn't mess up. I'm 99.9% sure it's Isaiah 43:1. But the one song that I've really liked, through all of this is Brother by Need to Breathe. I tear up every time I hear it, but I mean, anyone that has a sibling, I'd recommend that song. It just makes you feel their presence. And I listen to it quite often, but a new song that my mom just showed me is by Toby Mac, Goodbye for Gabe.
Listen to it.
And
it's so good.
Really, I listened to it when I was on spring break a few weeks ago, and I cried right away. I think that's a great song too. And there's so much out there. I mean, I do 21 Years by Toby Mac, anything by NF too, because his mom went through a similar loss, but his mom passed away due to drugs. And I think music can be very healing. I'm a big music person. So.
For sure. I think so many people relate. It's the number one coping skill that people put. Right now, I work at a suicide treatment center. And so we do stabilization planning. And like the number one thing I hear all the time is music as a coping skill. It is. It's super, even, I mean, if you're feeling sad, but you listen to a song that is sad, right? Like there's a relating that can happen. So you don't even necessarily have to listen to a happy song when you're feeling sad. I think it's just being able to relate to that music. You feel seen, you're not alone. Yeah. Which is what we all need to know, and so the 21 years, oh my gosh, we did not hear that song until a year after we lost Alex. So your mom said that you guys played that at the service. I hadn't even heard that song. And when I heard it, I mean, to this day, it gets me every time.
Yeah.
That last, and I read it with your mom, that last line of 21 years makes a man full grown, 21 years with a beautiful loan, 21 years I loved everyone. Thank you, Lord, for my beautiful son. And to me, that really represents this idea that like life is not something that's just guaranteed forever, right? I mean, obviously death is a part of life, but like we're loaned these people that we love. You know what I mean? And then like his grace and like thanking God for that. I don't know. That's huge. That hits me every time. It gives me a perspective that I need, right? That like to be grateful for what I did have. Yeah, it's huge. What does being a soul soldier in the battle mean to you as someone who has lost a brother to fentanyl?
I'd say the biggest thing is making sure that Logan's not forgotten. That's huge. It's easy to forget. It's easy for so many people not to think about that, but Logan's still here in my mind. He was with me every day, and I don't want people to forget that he's my brother. And also letting other people know that there shouldn't be a stigma. Like you said, everyone has their own struggle and is fighting their own battle. But if you need help, just don't be ashamed. It happens. It's just It's a thing of life. I think that's something that is getting better over time. Over the last 4 years, the stigma is definitely better. But it's not, I don't think it's where it needs to be yet. And I think the more that, we talk about things like this, the more that people listen, and the more billboards we have and the more people that we, reach out to, the better it gets. And I think, making sure that, Logan's not forgotten, that anyone who's lost their life to fentanyl, they shouldn't be forgotten, because their sacrifice and the pain that, we're going through, it can have a huge impact on your future and affect other people's lives in a good, positive way. I think that's one thing that is important and needs to be remembered. And then also to remember to end the stigma on drugs and fentanyl. These kids, they're not knowingly taking the fentanyl, and you can't blame them. It's not their fault. I think those are the two most important things and the biggest mission, I'd say.
So true. So true. When you were saying like the not knowing, I think there is so many people that don't know, right? I think that's huge. And going back to what you were saying with the cocaine, part of the testimony that we did, there was a family there that had lost a loved one because they had done what they thought was cocaine, and it was pure fentanyl. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, there's so much of that out there that people don't even know what they're taking. Actually, in Alex's situation, we do believe he knew what he was taking. And so even then, I never want anybody to feel shame, even if there is a drug use problem, right? There's a ton of people out there knowingly on fentanyl, right? And I think the bottom line is it's a part of this struggle that we face in life sometimes. And some people do get hooked on drugs, and some people do choose that. Still doesn't mean that's who they are, that they're a bad person, right? Like, not at all. I want to change the stigma around that too, right? So the stigma piece that you're saying is huge. And I think we need to acknowledge that part of life is struggle. Part of life is sometimes people turn to that to cope, right? That's not who that person is, though. That person is worthy of love and redemption and grace and forgiveness and all the things, right? And so, I think we need to talk more about these things too to reduce the stigma. Yeah. I think it's huge. Yeah. How can we as a community better show up for those who have lost a sibling to overdose?
The biggest thing I'd say, at least through my experience, is making sure that the surviving sibling feels like they're still seen. Over the past 4 years, that's one of the biggest struggles I've had with my parents is, Logan was more important when he was here on earth with us, and he's still more important when he's, up in heaven. And that's something that as a sibling, and I'm sure other siblings could probably relate to that as well, that's hard to deal with, that you're always going to be the least important in the family. And I think making sure that you take that, as parents, taking the time to make the surviving sibling feel seen is very important. Sibling or siblings, sorry. But I think that's huge, because it's very easy to feel overlooked, with so much going on. And to an extent, it's fair. I get it. Like, now getting older, I'm understanding it more. I've had 4 years to grow, and I get it now. But there's a lot of siblings who their brains they're not mature yet. They're in elementary, middle, or high school. They're not going to have the same understanding as, someone in their 30s or 40s. They can't look at it rationally. They're going to look at it emotionally. And I know that there's things that my parents haven't even thought of that I've brought up about how it's made me feel. And that's the hardest part. And I think that's so important, is make sure you don't overlook the remaining siblings, because they're going to be dealing with stuff that you don't even think of.
Man, dude, I'm learning so much from you just as we're having this. I'm learning a lot. If nobody else hears anything from this, thank you for putting this into my heart, right? I mean, oh my gosh. So, I mean, that lands so deeply, because I can see how when you lose a child, it's all consuming. It's all consuming. And I think what makes it that way in some ways is that loss, right? Like, they're not there anymore, right? And so going back to what I said earlier in this, where I was like, I think about Alex every day. And I was like, I think about him like, it's almost like, yeah, of course I'm thinking about my other kids, but they're there. I know that I'm going to go home and see them. Do you see what I'm saying? And so when I said, I think about him more, it's not like he's more important. It's just, I think it's that loss piece that puts it more prevalent in my mind throughout the day, if that makes sense. But even me saying that, I'm like, I never want my kids to feel like they're not thought about during the day, or that they're forgotten in this, right? Ever. I never want them to feel that way. And so I'm so glad that you are bringing this front and center of don't forget us, right? See us. I think it's huge. And not that you are forgotten, but I can see how I can see how that happens. I mean, even in our home, I mean, even his siblings, my kids, other kids talk about him all the time. It's like he's kind of sometimes the center of the conversation, you know?
Yeah. No, I think.
And how do we change that? You know, like I'm literally, as you're saying that, I'm thinking like, yeah, maybe it's in those moments I'm literally trying to brainstorm, like how do we change this as a community? Like, you know, maybe it's when we're talking about Alex, then we also go around and we talk about each other. Like we have something to say about each other. Maybe that's what it is, right? Like we just notice the other sibling, the other person, as well as we're, you know, talking about memories with Alex and that sort of thing. Like we're talking about each other in that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have suggestions to that? Yeah.
I think that's a great idea too. That made me realize as a sibling, you probably don't always ask your parents how they're doing, and remembering that they're grieving in a different way than you are. And that's something that and having grace is very important with that, because it's so easy for me to get wrapped up in my own stuff that I forget about my parents. Just as, it's hard if you're a parent, you could probably get wrapped up in your own grief as well. And it's not the first thing on your mind probably isn't what's the difference with the sibling grieving? So that makes me think about, it's different. And it's so easy to get wrapped up, but talking, making everybody share. I think that's a great idea.
I love that.
It's something I haven't thought about with my parents.
Yeah. I think as we're talking about, Alex, we need to remember to talk about each other as well. Like acknowledge each other at the table, if you will, I think that's huge. Yeah. Wow. We're having like revelations as we're talking. Like I'm like as you're talking, I'm like, what is the solution? Right. Or how do we see this? How do we see this a different way so that the siblings don't feel lost and forgotten about? And one thing I want to bring up too, I think you kind of touched on this, is you never want Logan to be forgotten. Right. And so, your mom pointed this out, that there's going to be, your future wife and your kids, like they're not ever going to know Logan. And that has to be really hard in a way. Yeah. And so I'm sure for you, keeping his memory alive is going to be crucial in that. So yeah, can you speak to that for a minute?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I've thought about a lot. I'd want him to be I'd like to say they're going to know him through my eyes. For example, I've thought about this a lot in depth, and I don't always know why, but for example, with my wedding, he's still going to be my best man. He's not going to be there, but he's still my best man, and he's going to have a seat reserved. I think that's important, keeping him alive in the way that you can, so that your family, my future kids, my future wife can see that. See how impactful they were to my life. And I think that's something that for siblings, it's very different than a parent, right? My future wife will never know my brother. My kids, they'll never know my brother. Even my friends, they never knew my brother. Other than, friends from high school, but we don't stay too much in touch anymore. But yeah, it's hard because I never thought that I'd have to go through my life explaining who Logan was and showing pictures. I thought I could, invite him over for dinner. But I do think it's extremely important for all siblings to not lose that. I saw a lot of times on social media, I've seen it being more common to have those saved seats at weddings, at important events for the ones that you have lost. And I do think that letting people know that's okay and that's totally normal is a really good thing. And that's something that I plan on doing myself.
That's an incredible
keep him
idea.
alive. Yeah.
That's an incredible idea. I never thought of that. I love that. I love that. I think my personal belief system is, I think Alex is here anyway, right? Just in a different form, right? He's not here physically, but he's still present, his soul, his spirit. And so, yeah, why not give them a seat at that table? And I think it's huge. Yeah. If your brother were here right now, and I think he is in spirit, right? What would you want to say to him?
Oh, man. I don't want to tell him I miss him a lot. Sorry. That I wish I could get his advice right now. I miss him every day. But most importantly, that I'm not, angry. I'm not judging him. That I love him more than I probably told him. So.
Caden, thank you so much. Is there anything else that hasn't been asked or shared about that you feel like you want the world to know?
I just want everyone to know that it's okay to struggle and it's okay to reach out for help. This is something I don't want other people my age to be going through. And I've probably already touched on this, but I want to stress how important it is that you're not alone. Struggling's okay. You're human. It's bound to happen. And you shouldn't just sit in your struggle. Reach out for help to people around you, your friends, and I want people to stop judging other people. It's easy to judge. I may have a different struggle than someone else, but that's okay. So just because their struggle is opioids and mine might be food, that doesn't give me the right to judge, and it doesn't give anyone the right to judge. A lot of, especially now too, with doctors, they prescribe, oxycodone, hydrocodone. They prescribe that all the time. It's not always someone's fault. The doctor prescribed it, and in your brain, you're thinking it's okay to take this, but you might get an addiction from that. I believe that's how Logan got his addiction started, because a doctor prescribed it. So it's not always so black and white. There's a big gray area that people need to realize that, like, we live in the gray. Life's not black and white, and just because someone's, addicted to pills doesn't mean it's their fault at all. It could be because a doctor prescribed it a few years ago, and their brain, just the way it's wired, it just really, it needs that now. I don't think that's their fault, though, and I think that is something that is so important to remember, that people can get addicted without realizing it, and then it's just a downhill battle from there, or uphill battle, I'm sorry. But it goes downhill, but it's an uphill battle for them. They got to figure it out, and I think they need to reach out for help. Having someone with you in that struggle makes it a little bit easier, like it does with any struggle. So I think that's the most important thing that I want people to remember is don't blame. It's easy for me to blame Logan. I can't speak for everyone else, but it was easy for me to blame him for the situation of what happened. But I'm, over the past 4 years, I'm trying to not do that. And it's also important for, someone that may have their sibling or their son or their daughter still alive. Don't blame them. Help them. I think that's so important.
I couldn't agree more. Caden, I see you. And I truly, this interview changed me in the process. You said things that I haven't thought about before. And so it's moved me and touched me. And so thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on here.
Yeah. Yeah.